The air in the Van Nuys garage was thick and suffocating, a cocktail of summer heat, stale pizza, and the faint electric smell of overworked amplifiers. Liam, his fingers raw and strings digging into his calluses, played the final chord of their song. It hung in the air, vibrating with a desperate energy that felt more like a prayer than a performance. This was it. The culmination of 2 years of relentless, thankless work. They called themselves Static Bloom, a name that perfectly captured their state of being, stuck, but with a sliver of hope. Maya watched him from her stool, her expression unreadable behind a curtain of dark hair. She meticulously polished her Fender Stratocaster, her movements precise and economical. Unlike Liam's raw, emotional approach, Maya was the band's anchor, the technician who translated his chaotic feelings into clean, sharp riffs. She believed in the music, but her pragmatism always clashed with Liam's unbridled optimism. She knew how many bands were practicing in garages just like this one, all across the vast, indifferent sprawl of Los Angeles. Across from her, Noah, the bassist, leaned back in a rickety folding chair, a goofy grin plastered on his face. He was the group's unshakable foundation, both musically and emotionally. While Liam and Maya wrestled with the artistic direction, Noah provided the steady, melodic heartbeat that held them all together. He ran a hand through his messy blonde hair and took a long sip of a lukewarm soda, his easygoing nature a necessary balm against the constant tension of their creative process. He trusted the journey, even if he had no idea where it was going. Suddenly, Chloe, their drummer, slammed her sticks down on the snare, the sharp crack echoing off the tool-covered walls. "That's the one," she declared, her voice filled with a fiery conviction. "It's perfect. It's ready." Chloe was the band's engine, a whirlwind of energy and impulsive decisions. She pulled out her phone, her thumb already hovering over the screen. "I'm uploading it. Right now. To SoundCloud, Bandcamp, everywhere. The world needs to hear Concrete Sunrise." Liam's heart leaped into his throat. "Wait, Chloe, are you sure? Maybe we should get it professionally mixed first? It sounds so garage." He was terrified of putting their creation out into the world before it was flawless, fearing the harsh judgment of anonymous listeners. The song was a piece of his soul, a raw nerve exposed, and the thought of it being dismissed or ridiculed was almost too much to bear. He looked to Maya for support, hoping she would share his caution. Maya, however, just shrugged, a rare glimmer of recklessness in her eyes. "What do we have to lose? It's not like we have the money for a professional mix anyway." She had a point. Their day jobs barely covered rent and equipment strings. This was their shot, however imperfect. Noah gave Liam a reassuring nod. "Go for it, Chloe. Let the universe handle the rest." With a defiant grin, Chloe hit the upload button, sending their raw, heartfelt song out into the digital void. The immediate aftermath was anticlimactic. The upload bar filled, the confirmation message flashed, and then silence. The four of them sat there in the sweltering garage, the weight of their expectations settling heavily in the air. They refreshed the page obsessively for the next hour, watching the play count barely tick into the double digits. Most of the plays were probably their own. The initial burst of adrenaline faded, replaced by a familiar, creeping sense of disappointment. The vast ocean of the internet had seemingly swallowed their song whole without a ripple. As the sun began to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the cluttered garage, the mood turned somber. The dreams of overnight success, of viral fame, evaporated with the daylight. "Maybe I should delete it," Chloe mumbled, her earlier fire extinguished. It was stupid to think anyone would notice. Liam didn't have the energy to argue. He just felt a hollow ache in his chest, the sting of pouring your entire being into something only to be met with deafening silence. They packed up their instruments quietly, the usual post-practice banter absent. The shared dream felt heavier. Tonight, more like a burden than a source of inspiration. As they prepared to leave, Liam's phone buzzed with a notification from their shared band email account. It was probably just another spam message, another offer for cheap playlist placements or fake followers. He almost ignored it, weary of the false hope that always seemed to lurk in their inbox. But something made him look. The subject line was, Deceptively simple, containing only 3 words that made no sense in their world. Regarding concrete sunrise. He opened it, his eyes scanning the brief professional text. It was a message from an assistant, curt and to the point, asking for a contact number to discuss the track. Liam was about to dismiss it as a cleverly worded scam, another predator preying on desperate artists. Then he saw the signature at the bottom of the email, a name that seemed so out of place it felt like a hallucination. It was a name that had defined West Coast music for decades, a titan of the industry, a legend. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. He read the name again, his breath catching in his chest, convinced his tired eyes were playing tricks on him. It felt like a dream, or perhaps the beginning of a very cruel joke. He turned the phone around to show the others, his hand trembling, slightly. "Guys, you need to see this." Maya squinted at the screen, her brow furrowed in disbelief, while Noah leaned in, his usual smile replaced by a look of stunned confusion. Chloe read the name aloud, her voice a hushed whisper that barely carried in the stillness of the garage. From the office of Dr. Dre. A week crawled by with agonizing slowness. The initial shockwave of the email had dissipated, leaving behind a residue of intense debate and gnawing uncertainty. The play count on Concrete Sunrise had stalled at a measly 157, a monument to their obscurity. The garage felt less like a creative sanctuary and more like a tomb where their dreams were slowly being buried. Every practice session was strained, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Was the email real? Or were they all just collectively losing their minds? Maya was the chief skeptic, her pragmatism acting as a powerful antidote to the others' cautious optimism. "Think about it logically," she argued, pacing the concrete floor. "Why would Dr. Dre, the man who has worked with Snoop Dogg, Eminem, and Kendrick Lamar, be listening to a no-fi demo from a band in Van Nuys? It's a phishing scam, a new elaborate way to get our personal info or hack our accounts. We shouldn't even reply." Liam, however, couldn't shake the feeling that this was different. He had spent hours scrutinizing the email header, tracing the IP, doing everything a layman could to verify its authenticity. It all seemed to check out, originating from a server linked to a major music corporation. "But what if it's not a scam?" he countered, his voice pleading. "What if someone, an intern, or an A&R person passed it along? Isn't this the kind of thing we've been dreaming about? We can't just ignore it." The conflict created a rift in the band. Chloe, who had initially been ecstatic, was now swayed by Maya's logic, her fear of being duped overriding her hope. Noah remained neutral, trying to mediate between the two factions. "Look, what's the worst that can happen if we reply?" he reasoned, calmly. "We don't send any passwords or bank details. We just reply, 'Who is this?' and see what happens. If it's a scam, we block them. If it's not," he left the sentence hanging, the immense possibility contained within it. After 3 days of tense arguments, they reached a fragile compromise. They would craft a simple, non-committal reply. They spent an entire evening agonizing over the wording, deleting and rewriting a single sentence a dozen times. They didn't want to seem too eager, but they also didn't want to sound dismissive. Finally, they settled on a cautiously professional response. "Thank you for your interest in our track. To whom are we speaking?" It was sterile, guarded, and betrayed none of the frantic hope and fear churning within them. With the entire band huddled around Liam's phone, he attached their message and, with a deep breath, hit send. The moment the email was gone, a wave of second-guessing washed over them. Had they sounded rude? Too detached? Should they have been more enthusiastic? The waiting began again, but this time it was different. Before, they were waiting for the world to notice them. Now, they were waiting for a single, specific response that could either validate their wildest dreams or confirm their deepest fears. 2 more days passed. The silence was deafening. Maya's "I told you so" expression became more pronounced with each passing hour. Liam found it impossible to focus at his dead-end retail job, constantly checking his phone, his stomach in knots. He started to believe Maya was right. It was a hoax, a digital ghost that had appeared only to vanish, leaving them feeling more foolish than ever. The hope that had briefly illuminated their world was fading fast. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, while Liam was half-heartedly stocking shelves, His phone buzzed. It was another email. His hands shook as he opened it. This one was more detailed. It introduced the sender as an executive assistant from Aftermath Entertainment and apologized for the initial cryptic message, explaining it was Dr. Dre's preferred method for initial contact to filter out noise. The email stated that Dr. Dre had personally heard the track and was impressed by its raw emotional core. The words blurred in front of Liam's eyes. Raw emotional core. Someone had heard it. Someone had understood what they were trying to convey. The email went on to propose a meeting. Not a vague promise, but a concrete invitation. They wanted the band to come to a recording studio in Santa Monica the following Tuesday to discuss the song. A specific time, specific address, and a contact person were all listed in clear, unambiguous terms. This was no longer a question of authenticity. This was a tangible, terrifyingly real opportunity. Liam dropped the box of merchandise he was holding, its contents spilling across the aisle. He didn't care. He fumbled to call the band's group chat, his voice cracking with a mixture of disbelief and elation. "You guys," he stammered. "You are not going to believe this. It's real. They want to meet us." The news was met with stunned silence. Maya's skepticism finally shattered, replaced by a wide-eyed wonder she rarely allowed herself to show. Chloe let out a shriek of pure joy that was so loud Noah, who was on the call with her, had to pull the phone away from his ear. The impossible had happened. Their song, born in a hot, cramped garage, had somehow, against all odds, reached the ears of a music industry icon. The reality of the situation began to set in, bringing with it a whole new wave of anxiety. What would they wear? What would they say? How were they supposed to act in the presence of royalty? The challenge was no longer about getting noticed. It was about proving they belonged. They had to step out of the garage and into a world they had only ever dreamed of, and they had to do it in 5 days. The 5 days leading up to the meeting were a blur of frantic preparation and nervous energy. Getting time off from their respective inflexible jobs was the first hurdle, requiring a series of hastily concocted excuses about sick relatives and dental emergencies. Their employers were skeptical, but the requests were granted, clearing the path for the most important day of their lives. The band spent every evening together, not practicing music, but practicing how to be people who belonged in a high-end recording studio. They debated their wardrobe choices with the gravity of world leaders planning a summit. Chloe insisted they needed to look like rock stars, suggesting ripped jeans and leather jackets. Maya argued for a more understated professional look, fearing they would come off as children playing dress-up. Liam and Noah were caught in the middle, just hoping to find something clean that didn't have holes in it. They eventually settled on a compromise, their best, most authentic selves, which ended up being a slightly more polished version of their usual garage attire. The morning of the meeting, a thick layer of marine fog blanketed the San Fernando Valley, giving the familiar landscape an ethereal, dreamlike quality. It matched their collective mood perfectly. The drive to Santa Monica, in Noah's beat-up 1998 minivan, which they affectionately called the Vibe, was mostly silent. The usual soundtrack of classic rock and indie anthems was absent, replaced by the hum of the engine and the sound of their own anxious breathing. Liam stared out the window, watching the suburban sprawl of the valley slowly give way to the more affluent manicured streets of the west side. Each mile marker felt like a step into another dimension. This was the world they saw in movies and on TV, a world of sleek glass buildings and luxury cars, so far removed from their reality of cracked asphalt and strip malls. He felt like an imposter, a kid from the garage about to be exposed as a fraud. Maya sat in the passenger seat, tapping a nervous rhythm on the dashboard. For the first time, her cool composure seemed to have abandoned her. She clutched a notebook containing a list of questions she had prepared. Questions about publishing, royalties, and creative control. It was her way of managing her anxiety, by trying to impose order on a chaotic and unpredictable situation. She was ready to defend their art, even if her hands were trembling. Noah, ever the steady presence, navigated the freeway traffic with a calm focus, though the tight grip he had on the steering wheel betrayed his own nerves. He tried to lighten the mood with a few bad jokes, but they fell flat in the tense atmosphere of the van. Even he, the eternal optimist, couldn't fully grasp the reality of what was happening. They were about to meet a representative of their idol, a man whose posters had adorned their walls and whose beats had shaped their musical DNA. Finally, after an eternity on the 405 freeway, they exited onto a quiet, palm-lined street in Santa Monica. The address on the email led them not to a towering corporate skyscraper, but to an unassuming modern building with no obvious signage. It was sleek, minimalist, and exuded an aura of exclusive privacy. It was the kind of place you could drive by 1,000 times and never know that musical history was being made inside. The contrast with their cluttered, oil-stained garage was staggering. They parked the Vibe across the street, its faded paint and dented fender looking comically out of place next to the row of black Teslas and Range Rovers. For a full 5 minutes, they just sat there, staring at the building, a silent wave of intimidation washing over them. This was the final threshold. Crossing that street meant leaving their old lives behind, for better or for worse. It was the moment where the dream became terrifyingly real. "Well," Chloe said, breaking the silence, her voice uncharacteristically small. "No turning back now." She took a deep breath, trying to summon her usual bravado. Liam looked at his friends, seeing his own mix of fear and excitement reflected in their eyes. This was it. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. He gave a determined nod, his resolve hardening. He opened the van door, the sound echoing on the quiet street. "Let's go meet our future," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The four of them got out, a tight-knit unit of nervous energy and threadbare dreams. They crossed the street, their footsteps feeling unnaturally loud, and walked towards the frosted glass doors. Liam reached out and pushed the door open, stepping out of the hazy sunlight and into the cool, quiet air of the studio lobby. As the door swung shut behind them, the bustling noise of the city disappeared, replaced by a profound silence. The lobby was a masterpiece of modern design, all polished concrete, dark wood, and subtle lighting. A woman with a headset sat at a simple, elegant desk. She looked up and offered a polite, professional smile. "You must be Static Bloom," she said, her voice calm and welcoming. "We've been expecting you." The assistant led them down a long, dimly lit hallway. The walls were adorned with platinum records and iconic photographs of music legends, a humbling gallery of the very history they hoped to one day join. Each step felt heavier than the last. Liam could feel his heart pounding against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat that was completely out of sync with the serene atmosphere of the studio. He tried to commit every detail to memory, the hushed reverence of the space, the low thrum of bass coming from behind a closed door. They were shown into a small, comfortable lounge area, adjacent to a massive recording suite. Through a wall of soundproof glass, they could see a sprawling mixing console that looked more like the command deck of a starship than a piece of audio equipment. The room was empty, yet it felt alive with a creative energy that was both inspiring and incredibly intimidating. This was a place where masterpieces were born, a hallowed ground for musicians. A few minutes later, a man entered the lounge. Wasn't Dr. Dre. He was tall, dressed in impeccably stylish but casual attire, and carried an aura of relaxed authority. He introduced himself as a senior sound engineer and a longtime collaborator of Dre's. He shook each of their hands, his grip firm and his smile genuine. He spoke with a calm, direct manner that immediately put them slightly at ease, cutting through their nervous jitters. "Dre heard your track on a deep dive for new sounds," the engineer explained, gesturing for them to sit. "He gets thousands of submissions, listens to hours of new music every week. Most of it is noise. But your song, Concrete Sunrise, it cut through. He said it had a raw soul that you can't fake. He was drawn to the honesty in the vocal performance and the grit in the guitar. Hearing their work described with such respect by someone of this caliber was surreal." Liam felt a flush of pride mixed with disbelief. Maya, ever the pragmatist, got straight to the point. "So, why did you ask us to come here?" she asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "What's the purpose of this meeting?" She was prepared for a complex record deal offer, a contract that would sign away their rights for a small advance. She had her notebook of questions ready, prepared to be the tough negotiator. The engineer smiled, appreciating her directness. "Simple," he said, leaning forward. "Dre wants to remix the song." The four band members exchanged confused glances. A remix? They were a rock band. A remix felt like something for a pop or EDM artist. "He's not looking to sign you, not yet. There are no contracts to sign today. This isn't about business. For him, this is about art, a creative exercise." He explained that Dr. Dre was intrigued by the challenge of taking their raw, indie rock sound and seeing what would happen if he applied his legendary production philosophy to it. He wanted to strip it down to its core elements, Liam's vocals, Maya's guitar, and rebuild it from the ground up. The offer was simple and completely unexpected. He would do the remix entirely for free. No charge, no strings attached. "All we need," the engineer continued, "are the master tracks, the stems, each instrument recorded separately. His one condition is that you give him complete creative freedom. You won't hear it until it's done. He wants to surprise you." This was the catch. They would have to hand over the raw ingredients of their song, their creative baby, and trust a complete stranger to reimagine it, with no input or oversight. The band was stunned into silence. This wasn't the offer they had prepared for. All of Maya's carefully researched questions about publishing splits and touring support were suddenly irrelevant. The choice was not about business. It was about trust. Could they let go of their creation and allow a master craftsman to deconstruct and rebuild it? The fear of losing the essence of their song was immense. What if he turned it into a slick, overproduced pop track they didn't even recognize? Liam looked at Maya, his silent question hanging in the air. She was the one who had meticulously crafted the song's structure, the one who was most protective of its integrity. He saw a war of emotions playing out on her face, her innate skepticism battling with the sheer, undeniable magnitude of the opportunity. To have Dr. Dre, a genius of sound, personally want to work on their track was an honor that transcended genre. Chloe, ever the risk-taker, was already nodding enthusiastically. "We have to do it," she whispered, her eyes wide with excitement. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Who cares what it sounds like? The story alone is incredible." Noah, as usual, looked to Liam and Maya, ready to support whatever decision they made. He saw the potential, the open door to a world they could never have accessed on their own. It was Maya who finally broke the silence. She closed her notebook, the list of unasked questions now obsolete. She took a deep breath and looked the engineer directly in the eye. "Okay," she said, her voice firm, betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. "You'll have the stems by the end of the day." The decision was made. They were taking the leap. Liam felt a surge of adrenaline, a potent mix of terror and exhilaration. They spent the next hour talking with the engineer, discussing the technical details of the file transfer. As they were about to leave, the engineer smiled. "One more thing," he said. "Dre wanted me to give you this." He handed Liam a sealed envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $5,000. The memo line simply read, "For the garage, keep the soul alive." The drive back to the valley was the polar opposite of the morning's journey. Silence was gone, replaced by a cacophony of excited chatter, laughter, and 100 what-if scenarios. They held the cashier's check like a holy relic, passing it between them, marveling at the sheer absurdity of it all. $5,000. It was more money than any of them had seen in one place. It was enough to fix the van, buy new gear, and pay their rent for a couple of months. It was breathing room. That evening, back in the familiar, comforting chaos of their garage, they meticulously exported the individual tracks from their recording session. Liam's raw vocal take, Maya's layered guitar parts, Noah's steady bass line, and Chloe's crashing drum fills. Each file felt like a piece of them. With a final, collective deep breath, they attached the files to an email and sent them off, casting their musical fate into the hands of a legend. The moment it was sent, the elation began to curdle into a new kind of anxiety. The silence that followed was a heavy blanket. The engineer had told them it could take a week, maybe longer. "Creativity doesn't follow a schedule," he had said. The band tried to return to their normal routines, but everything felt different. Their day jobs seemed more soul-crushing, the garage more cramped. They had tasted a different reality, and the waiting was a constant, agonizing reminder of what was at stake. As days turned into a week, the initial excitement began to fray, and tensions within the band started to surface. The uncertainty was a breeding ground for doubt and fear. Chloe, who had been the most enthusiastic, was now consumed by the possibilities of fame. She was already storyboarding the music video in her head, talking about what they would wear on a theoretical future tour. Her boundless optimism began to grate on the others' nerves. Maya, on the other hand, grew increasingly withdrawn and irritable. She was convinced they had made a terrible mistake. "He's going to turn it into a hip-hop track," she said one evening, her voice laced with bitterness. "He's going to auto-tune Liam's voice, replace Chloe's drums with an 808 beat, and sample my guitar riff into some unrecognizable loop. We sold our soul for a check and a cool story." Her fear was that their identity would be erased. The conflict came to a head during a practice session that quickly devolved into an argument. Liam found himself in the middle, trying to placate both Maya's artistic anxiety and Chloe's soaring ambitions. "We have to trust the process," he argued, though his own stomach was in knots. "This is Dr. Dre. He's a genius. He heard something in us. We have to believe he'll respect that." But even as he said the words, he wasn't sure he believed them himself. Noah tried to be the peacemaker, reminding them of the check. "He didn't have to do that," Noah said calmly. "That was a sign of respect. He's investing in us, not just using our song. We're a team. We need to stick together, no matter what that track sounds like when we get it back." His words helped to quell the argument, but the underlying tension remained, a fracture line running through the foundation of their friendship. Finally, 10 days after they had sent the stems, an email arrived. The subject line was just one word: surprise. Attached was a single, high-resolution audio file. For a full minute, no one moved. The file sat on Liam's laptop screen, a digital Pandora's box. All their hopes, fears, and arguments had led to this single moment. Listening to it would answer everything. The thought was terrifying. Chloe wanted to play it immediately, to hear their future. Maya, however, hesitated. "Maybe we should wait," she said softly, her earlier anger replaced by a quiet dread. "Once we hear it, we can't unhear it. What if I was right? What if it's awful?" The fear of disappointment was so acute, it was almost paralyzing. She would rather live in the uncertainty than face a version of their song that she hated. Liam understood her fear completely. This song was their shared heart, and the idea of hearing it broken was devastating. He looked around at his bandmates, Chloe vibrating with anticipation, Noah, his expression calm and supportive, Maya, looking more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. He knew they couldn't stay in this limbo forever. They had to face the music, literally. He placed the laptop on top of an amplifier, connecting it to the main speakers so they could all hear it properly. The garage, their sanctuary, and their prison fell completely silent. The four of them stood in a tight circle, a silent pact of solidarity. Whatever was on the other side of that click, they would experience it together. Their journey had started in this room, and so would this pivotal next chapter. With a trembling hand, Liam moved the cursor over the file. He took one last look at his friends, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had been on. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath to steady his nerves, and pressed the play button. The silence was broken, not by a familiar chord, but by a sound they never could have anticipated. The first thing they heard was silence, stretched out for 2 heartbeats. Then, a low, resonant bass frequency filled the garage, so deep and clean it felt like it was vibrating in their bones. It was a sound they could never have produced with their own equipment. Following the bass was a crisp, perfectly engineered drum beat. It was Chloe's rhythm, her pattern, but it was sharper, punchier, each hit landing with surgical precision. It wasn't a hip-hop 808, it was the sound of a live kit recorded in a world-class room. Then came Maya's guitar riff. It was still her riff, her unique melody, but it was enveloped in a subtle, atmospheric echo that gave it a haunting, cinematic quality. It sounded bigger, wider, as if it were filling a vast open space instead of a cramped garage. Maya's eyes went wide. He hadn't sampled it into a repetitive loop. He had taken her original recording and given it a new dimension, treating it with a reverence that she never expected. And then Liam's voice came in. He braced himself for heavy autotune, for the sterile perfection of modern pop. But it was his voice, exactly as he had sung it, with all the raw emotion, the slight crackle, the audible breath he had taken before the chorus. Dr. Dre had left it almost completely untouched. The only difference was that it now sat perfectly, in the mix, clear and present, the undeniable focus of the entire track. He hadn't hidden the flaws. He had framed them as strengths. The surprise wasn't that he had changed it. It was how he had changed it. He hadn't turned their rock song into something else. He had simply peeled back the layers of amateur production and revealed the powerful song that had been hiding underneath all along. The remix was a work of sonic architecture, building on their foundation to create something stronger and more beautiful than they could have imagined. Every element was enhanced, every emotion amplified. As the final chord faded out, echoing into a beautifully crafted reverb tail, the four of them stood in stunned silence. There were tears in Chloe's eyes. Noah was just shaking his head slowly, a massive grin spreading across his face. Maya looked as if a physical weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She looked at Liam, her expression a mixture of relief, awe, and a profound sense of artistic validation. "He heard us," she whispered. "He actually heard us." Liam felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled his knees. It was gratitude, relief, and an overwhelming sense of being understood. The legendary producer hadn't imposed his own vision on them. He had simply helped them realize theirs more fully. The surprise wasn't a genre flip. It was an act of deep, respectful collaboration, done from a distance. He had taken their concrete sunrise and made it feel like the real thing. The accompanying email from the engineer was short. "Dre hopes you like it. He has uploaded his remix to his official SoundCloud page. Good luck." Liam frantically navigated to the page. There it was. Static Bloom, Concrete Sunrise, Dr. Dre Remix. In the first hour, it had more plays than their original had gathered in its entire existence. The comments section was a flood of discovery, with people asking, "Who is Static Bloom?" The song was exploding. The remix was a key, unlocking a door they never knew how to open. It didn't make them famous overnight, but it gave them something far more valuable: legitimacy. Calls started coming in. Music bloggers, A&R scouts from independent labels, managers, booking agents. The email from Dre's office had been a spark. The remix was a wildfire. The world was suddenly paying attention to the small band from the garage in Van Nuys. They used the $5,000 to upgrade their most essential gear and rent a proper rehearsal space, a small room with soundproofing and air conditioning. It felt like a palace. The arguments and tensions of the waiting period dissolved, replaced by a renewed sense of unity and purpose. They weren't just a garage band anymore. They were a band with a future, a band with a story, co-signed by one of the greatest producers of all time. Their journey was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. There would be new challenges, difficult decisions, and the pressures of an industry that could be both thrilling and cruel. But they were ready. They had faced the void of obscurity, the terror of the unknown, and the internal conflicts born from fear and hope. They had put their art on the line and had been rewarded in the most unexpected way. Standing in their new rehearsal space, they looked at each other. The same four kids with the same dream, but with a newfound confidence in their eyes. The road ahead was uncertain, but they would navigate it together. Liam picked up his guitar. Maya adjusted her strap. Noah found his groove, and Chloe counted them in. As they launched into a new song, the music they made was filled with the sound of a future they were now ready to create for themselves. What an incredible journey of trust, talent, and a touch of magic from a legend. The story of Static Bloom is a reminder that you never know who might be listening. What did you think of the remix surprise? Let us know in the comments. If you were moved by their story, please give this video a thumbs up, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one. Click that bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.